Today today's presentation is meant as a showcase of what our language faculty is doing. The research is not necessarily research that is done as a part of dissertation projects or part of their job description enterprises, but rather as something that unites all faculty members, those who are tenure track, graduate students, and lecturers included, who found their interest in second language acquisition research in classroom research. So, and I hope that it will be inspiring to, come on in, that will be inspiring for other people, because again, it's an interesting venue that all of us can pursue and expand our professional abilities and expand our professional connections. And again, I strongly believe, and I hope that other guys who will be presenting today, as well as those in the audience, support this claim that research does help in our teaching, and it does make us better teachers, or maybe not. Well, anyhow, we hope that it does make us better teachers, and again, intuition is good. Intuition, of course, helps. The longer you teach, perhaps the better your intuition gets, but not necessarily. And it's very important that we actually can support our claims or intuitions by presenting research or by doing research, collecting data, collecting evidence that would testify that what we're actually doing in class brings our students to certain results, so that our practices are informed by research and are informed by evidence and analyzed evidence. So today we're presenting 4 studies, and they are rather diverse, and I hope again that it will illustrate the broad spectrum of our interests, as well as broad spectrum of our designs and languages that are being studied as a second language, target languages. So all the studies technically belong to classroom research. If you understand classroom research in a broader way, because not all the studies done just within the classrooms, but again, more broad understanding of classroom research includes studies that are not necessarily conducted within the classroom, but whose results can be beneficial to classroom and can be applied within the classroom. So for studies that will be presented today are effects, I'm sorry, this should be of peer learning on students' linguistic development in Russian, effects of the corrective written feedback on the second language acquisition of Russian, language socialization, the attitudinal change toward writing practices among advanced Chinese second language learners, and performative approach to language teaching, the effects of a drama focus on speaking anxiety and motivation. As you can see, the studies cover a really broad area of second language research. I thought that perhaps some pictures would be helpful in presenting those studies. The first study that has been conducted in the Slavic department by my colleague Alina Dudenko and myself investigates the effects of peer learning. We all know, and we have been all encouraged to use not just teacher-centered approach in our language classrooms, but also engage our students. And this is such a common technique that it kind of makes you wonder whether this technique actually works. We might say yes, just from the even from this pictorial representation, you can tell that yes, the amount of talk increases. Students do have more opportunities to use language, and they have more opportunities to engage. However, does this necessarily translate to acquisition? Does it mean that students actually perform better? Does it mean that they actually learn? So what happens during these interactions, and whether interactions between the students can be actually more effective, like whether these interactions are more effective than interactions with a teacher. So this, the major idea of the study, to show if and whether interactions between the learners result in any linguistic and sociocultural gains. Another study, I guess you can tell from the picture again what this is about. All of us do provide written feedback. Some of us, including myself, provide excessive written feedback that might even overrun in length the very production. So does it really help? Do we really have to do it? Is it effective? What kind of feedback is effective? For instance, if the student submitted something like this in her essay, and we corrected it and changed the present perfect, we changed past tense, and we want to see if it actually results in better production in revision, or in better production in new text. If the student writes something new, whether it actually results in better and more accurate writing. So that's the second study. The third study, and please forgive me if there are any mistakes here, because it's a Google translator that did Chinese translation here. But again, you see the idea behind it. So the study investigates how socialization in writing practices affect individual students, whether their attitude toward certain practices changes through being part of a group, whether being part of the group actually results in the change of attitude towards certain linguistic practices. And the final study that will be presented today investigates a teaching approach, a drama pedagogy, a drama approach to teaching, whether this teaching actually affects students' anxiety level, whether anxiety and motivation, whether the way we teach can actually make students want to come to classes, want to speak, and overcome the anxiety. And we all know that, yes, there are students who would confess that they just don't speak in class. They're terrified, they're mortified by the idea of having to talk, having to speak in a foreign language in front of the group, or how we can bring students to the point where they actually enjoy this speaking, and where the speaking in the classroom becomes a pleasant experience, and they actually want to engage in it. So these are our 4 studies. So I will present the first study, and my colleagues will present their studies. Please feel free to interrupt. So let's not make it a lecture, but rather a conversation, and let us know when you want some explanations, or if you have a feedback, or if you have anything you think you want to contribute. So the first study, effects of peer learning, peer instruction. I don't remember, it was probably 4 years ago when it was really a boom, when even instructors from other disciplines were adopting this method and were saying how important it is that students actually teach each other, and that in fact it kind of accelerates teaching, accelerates acquisition, and it's really useful. We also had this in mind, and we were hoping that first of all, it will increase this kind of unforced communication, will increase the amount of production, because we all know that how little students produce. And I don't know what your caps are within the classes. Our cap is 20 students. So you can imagine how much they can produce if you have such a high cap. It's pretty much impossible unless you actually do have them engage with each other and talk with each other. And again, how much of it you can control or how much you can attend, very questionable. So our hope is that if we assign them homework that would require them to communicate, it would engage them in conversation and would result in higher amount, a great amount of production in the target language. We were also hoping to understand whether this type of interaction actually results in any gains. And finally, of course, it's a way to develop new assessment. We all know that, yes, we all use tests and quizzes and other ways to assess students' development, but again, to what extent they are effective and what they actually measure, because they measure performance on certain very restricted and very scaffolded tasks and very unnatural tasks. So we were hoping that this semi-formal, semi-structured conversation would actually produce semi-real communication that can be actually assessed for the development, and we can invent new ways of assessment of this development. So the research questions were, does peer-to-peer interaction positively affect students' acquisition of Russian? Do students develop functional ability in Russian? Again, instead of testing your students on individual items on a quiz or a test, this actually shows whether students can engage in semi-real-life production and whether they can perform certain functions. Second question was, what linguistic domains are affected the most by peer learning? Phonology, morphology, syntax, or pragmatics? Does peer learning affect learners' meta-linguistic awareness? Do they better understand where something is appropriate to say and where certain expressions or forms are not appropriate? Again, it was limited because it's an interaction between peer-to-peer, so it's very informal to begin with. But again, even within this interaction, there are certain restrictions, and we can look for how well students attend those. Question number 4, does discourse produced during peer-to-peer interaction offer sufficient evidence for assessing students' linguistic development? Can discourse-based assessment replace regular classroom tests? What rubrics will be used for such assessment? So this is the level of assessment, particularly interesting to me, because again, it's already real discourse. It's not itemized production, but again, functional performance of certain functions and producing of discourse, and you can just judge the discourse. And finally, the final question was, how do students respond to peer interaction and how do they evaluate peer learning? Does peer learning help create a community of practice? So let's look at our participants. The participants here, it's also a little twist within the design of this particular study that we paired up advanced and intermediate learners. We hoped that actually this kind of interaction would be more effective when those who have more proficiency would actually feel that they want to talk, that they want to teach, and those who have less proficiency would feel that they can ask questions about various aspects of language because they knew ahead of time that they are communicating with advanced speakers. And that's, both groups were simultaneously, or at this time of the research, they were signed up for third-year Russian and second-year Russian, respectively. The problem I will address was technical, of course, like how to make them report. And again, Adobe didn't work well. We had to give up Adobe and turn to regular video first, and then to regular audio, because it was very difficult, like technically it was difficult. And this is a big drawback for this research, because you want to collect data, you have a good idea in mind, but again, you stumble over technicalities when inability to do something efficiently makes the task itself, compromises the task, because students just simply don't want to do it because it's kind of frustrating if the website constantly fails, if you have to put in so many passwords, so it's not a fun experience. So that's a big drawback of the research, that it wasn't really pleasant to anyone. Data illustration had several forms. It was pre and post test. It was audio recordings. We settled for audio eventually instead of video. And self-assessment questionnaire and experience questionnaire. Within all these instruments, the following types of knowledge were assessed: general knowledge, structural knowledge, sociocultural knowledge, oral ability, topic knowledge, integrated skills, enjoyment, and community building. Also, a few words about the task. As I mentioned, those tasks were partially structured. Students were not just said, okay, go and talk. They were actually given quite straightforward and detailed instructions about what speech acts they were supposed to use. For instance, in this conversation, make sure that you open up your conversation appropriately, that you don't just rush into conversation, that you say hi, you know how to enter the conversation and end the conversation, you know how to take turn, how to ask for the floor, how to request to be talking. They were also assigned to discuss certain topics related to the curriculum. They discussed residences, they discussed travel, they discussed furnishing rooms. So typical topics for the intermediate level Russian, and also for the advanced intermediate Russian, where those topics are again addressed at the higher level. So topics were given, functions were prompted as well. And students were also given some models, which they were allowed to opt to use or disregard and use their own models of speaking. So these are just the preliminary results of the questionnaires. I thought it's kind of interesting to show. Intermediate group, and you can tell that what concerns their self-assessment of the development, it was really high. All students thought that they actually benefited from these experiences and they learned a lot. If you can tell, their disagreement grew when the question concerned the task and how the task happened, the format of the interaction. So not everyone thought that topics were helpful, that actual structural format was helpful. Perhaps some of them wanted to just roam free. Some of them didn't like that they were supposed to talk about certain topic, that you see this red column. They also didn't like this particular assignment when they had to listen to other people. They prefer just to talk rather than to listen. So this is first group questionnaire. And the advanced learners were more diverse in their evaluation of the task, whether this entire experience were helpful. So the majority, yes, kind of supported this experiment and supported this entire format. However, you can tell that there's more diversity in students' response, and not all of them agreed that they actually benefited in terms of linguistic gains from this experience, which is kind of understandable because they were advanced students, communicating with students who were whose proficiency was lower than theirs. So of course for them it was not necessarily communicated with a real partner. For them it was a communication with a weaker student. And in addition to objective difficulties in communication, there could be just subjective idea that you don't learn from someone who is a lower level than you are. So it could be just the case that this stereotype in our knowledge kind of prevented them from assessing this experience as actually providing opportunity to learn. Because when we all know, when we teach, we learn. And sometimes when we have to teach, we learn more than when we are students and we're learning. So these students have this opportunity, but again, as I'm saying, not all of them saw it this way. Some of them saw it as they were confined to the communication with a weaker partner, and they didn't like it. But overall, it was very positive feedback. They all thought that it was actually a learning experience. And they actually gained more compared to the control group. Again, if we look at the numbers, it was not the design, not the design, but the number, the total number of the students doesn't permit to run significant statistics because it's not just simply, it's not enough data. And again, as I said, the technical difficulties in a way prevented us from organizing another round of this data collection because it has to be more pleasant and more effective to collect more data of the sort. So these are preliminary answers to the research questions. Does peer-to-peer interaction positively affect student acquisition of Russian? Do students develop functional ability in Russian? Yes, particularly those with low proficiency levels. Those definitely, you can hear them on the audio tapes that they, especially because they didn't feel that they're given into the instruction when they used models. And in fact, by using the models, they acquired those models, and it was actually beneficial to them because, again, we are stipulated, and it's actually part of the description within the ACTFL guidelines and within the ACTFL format that intermediate level starts from the student's ability to create with language. But we all understand that creating with language doesn't mean producing intelligible language. Sometimes you better not create. You better follow the model, and then people would understand you. And if you create something, it might bring you to something absolutely unintelligible. So, and in fact, most of the students felt that there's nothing bad in using the model, and that's why this acquisition, it's one of the explanations of why this acquisition actually happened. What linguistic domains are affected the most? Syntax, length and complexity, we can tell, and again, it's probably partially because of the models they were given. They were able, instead of producing little phrases, they were able to say a little bit longer phrases. And grammatical accuracy was also affected, particularly subject, verb, and agreement, and some simple cases of case. We have 6 cases, and students were able to control simple cases, which again, we have hierarchy of the cases. Third question, does peer learning affect learners' mental linguistic awareness? Yes, particularly as related to grammar. So it's an interesting finding in a way that despite the scaffolding provided in regards to sociocultural knowledge, they kind of thought it's not important, that the sociocultural knowledge is not important, but grammar is important. So whichever feedback or prompts they had, their primary attention was given to grammar. Again, it shows that our job and our trade, unfortunately, or it's hard to say whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, like many other traits, is affected by stereotypes. That there are certain beliefs that students come to class. They have the belief that it's actually better if you communicate with an upper level student. They have this belief that that the sociocultural level is not important whatsoever, that the grammar, that's what's important, anything else is not important. So those are stereotypes, and those are knowledges or beliefs that the students bring to the classroom. And it's up to us whether we reinforce those beliefs or we kind of try to change them. Because it is important that students know where it is appropriate to say something and what are the contexts where some phrase is restricted. And it's funny, even very high proficiency students can come up to you using informal language. I meet this kind of incidents all the time as a director of the program, because people would contact me saying hi in Russian, which is a little bit weird given the age difference, given the status difference, and if you trained into cultural appropriacy, you wouldn't use it. But these students, even with high proficiency in language, would still go with this very informal language that is only appropriate within formal communication. So, and I think this is a stereotype, again, that students bring to class and we never actually amend it because we think, no, grammar is more important. We also believe that grammar is more important than sociocultural knowledge. And that's actually shows here that learners improved grammar rather than sociocultural understanding, because that's what they wanted to improve, not necessarily because they didn't have a chance to improve other levels of language. Does discourse produced during peer-to-peer interaction offer sufficient evidence for assessing students' linguistic development? Absolutely. It offers for a more integrated assessment that approximates real-life communication. And I think this is the most fascinating element of this research, and I hope maybe other people would pick it up, because developing meaningful assessment at the level of discourse is definitely an interesting and deserving task, rather than having your students perform quizzes and tests that target just individual elements that are insulated in so many ways. And the very idea of a test or a quiz is not very real. It's not something that you can actually use outside of the classroom. It's not like, okay, Hannah, what was this genitive singular that I have to use here? No, it's not like how communication happens. Communication happens when you actually accomplish a function. And this is what this study showed, that actually we can elicit this material and we can actually start evaluating and assessing our students' progress based on the discourse level. How do students respond to peer-to-peer interaction, and how do they evaluate peer learning? Does peer learning help create community? Yes. Even though we see that there is more diversity in how students, especially advanced students, assessed the helpfulness of this enterprise, all of them felt that they actually improved, and they actually across the board felt that they had gains, that they had practice, and it was beneficial to their learning. And these are just some conclusions. The peer-to-peer interaction offers opportunities for pushed output. Again, we would strongly suggest that students are given certain form. It's not like, okay, go and talk. It's not like this. They have to actually be assigned certain performing of certain function, or exhibiting the ability to end the conversation, to end the conversation, to perform requests, to perform apology, to perform compliment, and discuss a certain topic, or perform a narration, or perform a description. It has to be spelled out. If you don't, then you'll end up with, I'm sorry, a rubbish conversation. That's something you don't want. It shapes new affordances for learning, absolutely, by creating non-threatening atmosphere, if it's effectively, if the technical side is effective, of course, and lowering effective barriers to second language acquisition. Learners were able to produce paragraph-long discourse, a necessary prerequisite for advanced proficiency. And again, it's stipulated. It's not that students were left alone in performing this task. They were actually said that's what they have to try to do. Learners have demonstrated progress in the following areas: structural complexity, utterance length, vocabulary, and grammatical accuracy. As we see, no cultural, sociocultural gains were noticed. And no gains have been recorded in learners' socio-pragmatic knowledge, as I said. This finding contradicts learners' self-reported increased control over pragma-linguistic functions. When they were asked how comfortable you feel asking a native speaker to do this, to do that, request and apologize, oh yeah, sure. And this is again, didn't match up their tests on sociocultural knowledge, because they were given certain situations where they were asked to respond, or where they were asked to judge whether the response is correct, and those tests showed that in fact students did make progress, but yet they felt that they did. That's all. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. And if not, we'll just move on to the next study. Deborah? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, please, go ahead, Deborah.
I just had a quick question about the control. Well, first, what did they do? I mean, what made them the control group?
Great question. They were control group because they did nothing. They just followed the regular class. They didn't have peer-to-peer interaction. Of course, there were peer-to-peer interaction, but within the class and nothing outside the class.
Okay, so the experimental groups had this extra component, and they had
yes.
a very structured peer-to-peer interaction. The control groups got just whatever.
They basically followed the syllabus. Both groups followed, so they were two sections of the same course. And this group had additional audio recordings, and there were not many of them. There were just 5 of the course of the semester, and this group did nothing of the sort.
Okay, and but they were also tested pre and post.
Yes.
But did they show any gains? Or have you been able to look at that?
As I said, this group actually outperformed. Statistically, it's impossible to tell because we didn't have good numbers. But again, it only on the measures related to language, not pragmatics.
I was going to say that the non-threatening atmosphere that was created, does that pertain particularly to vocabulary enhancement, or is it more like, with the grammar you learn by example, so you can see a good student using correct grammar and can kind of hang on to that. But this, I would say that perhaps a non-threatening atmosphere doesn't really pertain to when there is some difference in vocabulary knowledge. So I would say maybe the intermediate students could be perhaps a little bit intimidated by a lesser amount of vocabulary at hand. Is that, or did not?
It's a great question. Like altogether, whether pairing them up with someone who's a little bit higher up on the hierarchy is actually not that friendly an atmosphere, but again, based on their reports, they found it absolutely friendly and comfortable, and you can tell just by this picture that it was the time when we were still able to do video, so they felt rather comfortable about it. If we redo this experiment, it was just a pilot, perhaps we'll limit it to students of the same level, and probably students from the same group, just to avoid possible effects of other variables, so that there is more control.
The analysis of the students' language production. So you were analyzing individual students. Did you analyze the conversation pattern, like the interaction between them? Because you
Yeah,
mentioned
that's how
there's.
that's the discourse. You basically analyze functionality, and you have certain tags. Again, you break it down to certain knowledges. That's how you assess discourse. You can go further and go through another round on tagging, saying, okay, I also want to, like conversational analysis does, I also want to see the turn taking, I also want to see correct interruptions. So you can add more tagging if you want, but we just limited ourselves to easy.
Okay. So you analyze individual students instead of analyzing the two students together.
Yes, each student had their own tags and their own profile.
Because I'm wondering the lack of that you didn't see the progress made in pragmatics if you analyze the conversation, if you can see some of those in the conversation pattern.
But you have the same students, and you kind of can tell a student at time 1 and the same student at time 2 at the end of the experiment, whether actually the way student performs a certain function is better. Especially because while many functions kind of changed, but they're entering and exiting the conversation and taking floors kind of pertain to the entire interaction. In each interaction, they would do the same thing, and you can actually assess how well it goes.
Just a quick question, how many presentations we still have? 3, so will be 1 hour per presentation or what? I don't know, I just want to hear them all, so.
That's a good idea, yes.
Yeah,
So
so-
I better give
Do anybody control the time?
Thank you. Obviously, we haven't. And I'm happy to give the floor, and thank you for interrupting. This is an example of elegant interruption.
Sorry.